This is the Conservative News Review, bringing you news and views. New Zealand showed the way. Fed up with 14 years of socialism, the electors threw out the Labour government and elected to power Mr Holland and his National Party. Mr Holland's success brought him shoals of congratulations on the morrow of his victory. It was achieved on a programme of private enterprise and the greatest possible reduction of controls. Mr Holland, who entered Parliament in 1935, is a family man with two daughters, Joclyn and Lois. In that mainly agricultural country where farming is the chief industry of the nation and chief livelihood of the individual, the new Prime Minister is appropriately a practical farmer. His model farm lies 60 miles away from Christchurch, New Zealand's seat of government. Australia followed New Zealand's example and threw out the socialists, bringing back to the premiership that most stalwart of empire statesmen, Mr Menzies, who led his country in the early days of the last war. Mr Menzies, seen on the morrow of victory with his wife and daughter at their home near Melbourne, will head a coalition. It consists of his own followers and the Country Party, whose leader is Mr Farron. Here's the new cabinet. Among them, Mr Casey, well known to us as Minister of State in the Middle East in Mr Churchill's government. Mr Menzies, in an address to the Australian public, promises to act for all in the spirit of unity.
You have given us not only an enormous majority, but an enormous task. We're going to do our best to perform that task. And all the time that we're performing it, we shall remember that we represent all the people, not just the ones who voted for us, but the ones who voted against us. And that the real thing that we have to produce in Australia is not only national prosperity, but national unity.
We would have liked to show you some pictures of the groundnut scheme, but by a strange coincidence, such pictures have been hard to come by. It's a feature of socialism that prying eyes and cameras are not welcomed in nationalized undertakings. What you're looking at now is a bit of the terrain scheduled for cultivation by the Overseas Food Corporation. A delegation of the United Nations has arrived to inspect the work, but it's not the right time of year for growing nuts. There are pictures of Mr Strachey inspecting the scheme, driving a tractor and handling nuts, but those are apparently Crown copyright and not available for the Conservative News Review. Meanwhile, do you believe in Father Christmas? Now for a practical example of enterprising farming. Cattle ranching in Scotland. Only grouse and deer inhabited this highland landscape until Lord Lovat, with the pioneering faith which has made this country great, launched his experiment of cattle ranching on New World lines. The cattle, which are beef cattle intended for meat, not the pedigree stock in which of course Britain has always excelled, are rounded up in the autumn and driven down to their low-ground winter pastures. The scheme owes nothing to socialist encouragement. In fact, Lord Lovat, here helping to drive the hill-bred cattle into a corral, had difficulty in securing official interest in his plan for providing more homegrown beef. Each head of his herd of 650 is inoculated against disease. After that, they have their tails bobbed to distinguish age groups, branding being considered unnecessary. Then through the dipper where the cows and calves are separated. The calves are loaded into carts for southern markets. And seeing that his herd alone could provide 1 week's meat ration for 500,000 mouths, a lot of people will agree with Lord Lovat when he says,
"Surely it is entirely wrong that during the present economic crisis we should continue to borrow money from abroad to buy these same meat products from overseas."
The new House of Commons, seen here in the shadow of Big Ben, is now complete so far as the main structure goes. It is in many respects an improvement on the one Hitler bombed. A number of innovations have been planned by the architect, Sir Giles Scott, seen on the right, with Mr Luxton, clerk of the works. Mr Gardner of Twickenham and his son are responsible for much of the stone carving. The plan of the interior shows what the chamber will look like when finished, and good progress has already been made. Great attention is being paid to acoustics, of course. The press gallery, with seats entered from behind, will accommodate 161. The distinguished visitors' gallery, like the rest of the house, will be fitted with amplifiers, one loudspeaker being placed between every 2 seats. Decoration is obviously of a very high standard of craftsmanship. For very important persons, there's a special cloister-like gallery, and this is where the opposition benches will be occupied, we hope, quite frequently by socialists. The position of the Speaker's chair is marked. It's to come from Australia, by the way. And the division lobby. It's a tradition that there must be a fireplace here in spite of central heating. Finally, the Churchill arch, in which the effect of bomb damage is to be preserved as a memorial. The presentation by Lord Kemsley to Mr Churchill of the medal and the £1,000 literary prize was a big occasion at the Sunday Times book exhibition. In his speech of thanks, he had a number of amusing things to say.
I can speak to you about the difficulties and the dangers of writing a book, that I've written a very great many books. I think by the time I was 25 years old, I'd written as many books as Moses. And I've very nearly been keeping up that pace. Writing a book is an adventure. To begin with, it is a toy and an amusement, and then it becomes a mistress, and then it becomes a master, and then it becomes a tyrant, and the last phase is that just as you are about to be reconciled to your servitude, you kill the monster.
Then, referring to his winning of a similar prize over 10 years ago, he quotes from the speech he made on that occasion.
But I was very much struck by the fact that what I said 12 years ago, I could to a large extent repeat it, almost verbatim today. Let me just give you this point. Mr. Churchill said that the author created out of his brain important new values, material and moral. If, he said, his books are read abroad, he is an addition to the export trade without any corresponding reciprocal importation. And I said, I think a wise Chancellor of the Exchequer would allow authors to write off every year against income tax a substantial sum for depreciation of mental machinery through wear and tear, through age and time. I thought of this, I said, when I was Chancellor of the Exchequer, but I refrained from motives of delicacy.
Of course, the exhibition featured Mr. Churchill's prize-winning masterpieces. Now tell of days when Britain proved her stature and justified the designation great. When casting any weakness from her nature, she challenged all the villainies of fate. Tell first of that dramatic, breathless story that shed upon Dunkirk eternal fame, of gallantry that garnered epic glory by the sheer miracle of foiling shame. What follows but the saga of the fearless, the few, the faithful warriors of the air, that episode of valor almost peerless, an inspiration never to despair. Then speak of murder from the clouded heavens, unloosed upon our homes without regret. And whisper of the men who made it evens when their time came to balance up the debt. At sea, there swarmed the underwater demon whose rules were ruthless, for his life was short. So glorify the courage of the seamen who sailed the precious cargoes through to port. Search all the naval records of devotion. Never was duty's part more nobly played. In narrow channels and on widest ocean, the call to strength or sacrifice obeyed. Then tell of desert days and stern endurance, the tide that flowed and ebbed across the sand, until the spirit of renewed assurance swept Rommel from that long contested land. And so to Normandy and liberation, the victory which crowned the Allied arms. Relief, joy, ecstasy, and exultation replaced anxiety, suspense, alarms. Again, our course encounters heavy weather, the present grim, the future overcast. Unite, resolve, stand upright and together, be great again, and emulate the past.